Good morning and welcome to Considerations when Reopening Museums. Hopefully by now you have had a chance to look over the brief document, Considerations when Reopening Museums, that was shared on our website. The intention of that document was to get people to start thinking about reopening. Unfortunately, reopening is not going to be a simple process. There are a lot of things that you will need to think about. Some of you mentioned that you have summer students either already working with you or that they will be starting soon. Now, if you have your summer student on site, then you have probably already made some changes to accommodate shared spaces and physical distancing. And if your students haven't started yet, you are now probably really starting to think about those things. Before we get too far along, I just want to say that while museums and galleries are permitted to open under Phase 4, Part 2, which has been released as Monday, June 29th, it does not mean that you have to open. It is just the earliest that you will be allowed to open to the public. The reason I mention this is because in order for you to open safely, there are specific things that you will need, like personal protective equipment, which I will refer to from here on in as PPE, hand sanitizers, disinfectants, and other general cleaning supplies. And you will likely discover that there is a limited supply of these things available, or that you cannot readily find any in your community. But more on that in a bit. I would like to thank those of you who submitted questions in advance. It helps to know where I should focus this discussion. And before I begin, I would like to point out that the recommendations that I will make are just that, recommendations. Now, the first step that is suggested in the considerations when reopening museums is isolating your building. This is recommended if you have concern over possible contamination of COVID-19 on site. The Canadian Conservation Institute released a wonderfully comprehensive technical note on caring for heritage collections during the COVID-19 pandemic. While the risk of contracting the coronavirus from surfaces, understood in this context to be collections materials, is not as serious as it was perceived at the beginning of the pandemic, but it is still a risk. Isolation is the best measure for protecting your collections. As the virus has persisted on various materials for differing lengths of time, the longest of which is 6 to 9 days, therefore, to ensure that the virus no longer poses a threat to the health of people, an isolation period of 9 days is recommended. For this step to be effective, once the isolation has been started, absolutely no one should be on site for any reason until the 9 days are over. So please, prior to closing, ensure that appropriate measures have been taken to protect your museum and collections during your absence. This will include making sure doors and windows are secure and locked, pest traps are set up, and if you are aware of any spots that may leak in your institution, consider putting out buckets and pans to prevent any damage. You may still monitor and patrol the museum's exterior during this period. In fact, that is encouraged. For those of you that are not able to isolate your building, for whatever reason you need someone on site daily, you can isolate the individual that is required on site. By which I mean, have them wear a full disposable Tyvek suit with hood up, face mask, gloves, and boots. This will prevent them from either recontaminating the site or contracting the virus from a potentially contaminated building. Hopefully, with the initial calls to shelter in place and the subsequent closure of all non-essential services, this step has already been done for most of you. The second step is staff reentry. Many of you are already well into this phase if you have summer students on site. And if you are really looking into this stage, I highly recommend the National Center for Preservation, Technology and Training's video on re-entry to cultural sites. Now, not all of your staff should be returning to work as usual. Physical distancing measures are still in full effect. This step is for your re-entry team, those select few individuals who will be required to clean and prepare your museum for general use. Yes, cleaning is still a necessary step, even if you have completed the first step. Remember, the first step ensures that there is no virus active on site. Whoever is on your re-entry team should be healthy enough to participate in re-entry. This means you'll have to check in with them prior to the scheduled date of re-entry to make sure that they have not been sick, that anyone they are staying with has not been sick, and that they have not been in contact with anyone who has otherwise been sick. As mentioned before, physical distancing is still in full effect, so whoever is assigned this role will need to be able to maintain safe distancing from other teammates. To that end, have your team work in separate parts of your building while cleaning. Stagger their schedules so they are not all arriving at the exact same time, or for that matter, that they are not going for their breaks at the same time. In the case where physical distancing cannot be properly observed, all re-entry team people will need to wear appropriate PPE. In terms of cleaning, it is recommended that the cleaning products used are ones that clean and disinfect. Health Canada has produced lists of approved and recommended disinfecting products and hand sanitizers. I will share the links to the resources I've mentioned in the chat box once my presentation is over. Any disinfectant or hand sanitizer you purchase should have a drug identification number, which is abbreviated to a DIN, or a natural product number, which is abbreviated to an NPN. You will need to thoroughly clean your museum, and you will have to implement specific cleaning procedures in response to the pandemic. These cleaning procedures will address the frequency of cleaning for communal and public areas, and you will need to identify frequently touched surfaces that will require regular cleaning. Things like light switches, doorknobs, handles or push bars, countertops, door frames, etc. I also recommend that you look at what you have for communal staff areas. If you are sharing a kitchen or a break room, develop a schedule around when it will be used. Encourage breaks or lunches to be taken separately or outside, while still observing physical distancing. Do not keep food on site. What you bring with you should leave with you. When and where possible, designate staff entrances and keep them separate from public entrances. Also, if you have multiple bathrooms, keep staff bathrooms separate from public bathrooms. Have staff clean the bathrooms after they have used it, and implement a schedule for cleaning public bathrooms. Have one staircase for going up and one for going down. And post signs to indicate these changes. Do a walkthrough of your organization. Think how you can control the flow of people through your exhibitions. You may have to block sections to create a clear path for visitors to follow. Can you create staff-specific access points that keep them out of public areas? Think about how you're going to handle admissions. Are you using time ticketing? Are people booking visitation on your website? Are you asking them to call in advance? Whatever you decide to do to manage public entry, you must make sure that the information is widely distributed and readily available to the public. Post changes frequently to your social media. Make sure the changes are noted on your website and throughout your website. Please don't just make a post on your main page and ignore it everywhere else. Post changes visibly at main entrances and make sure all of your staff and volunteers are aware of these changes. Do a quick self-assessment. What makes you feel comfortable around other people in light of COVID-19? When you go out, are you wearing a mask? Do you carry hand sanitizer? What are the measures that you yourself have taken for your home and your family? These are the measures that you should try to implement for your organization. The Government of Saskatchewan has compiled a list of pandemic suppliers in Saskatchewan. When you have finally acquired all the appropriate cleaning and disinfecting materials and necessary PPE, completely cleaned your museum, implemented routine cleaning schedules, and moved or blocked access to difficult-to-clean items, like electronics or interactives, then you can start preparing for Step 3, reopening to the public. The good news is, much of what you have done to make your museum safe for staff to work in has helped you realize what you will need to do when considering for the general public. If you have had to make changes to accommodate on-site staff workspaces, how has that impacted public areas? For example, are you closing an exhibition space to set up temporary offices to ensure physical distancing for on-site staff. Another bit of good news is, with museums opening in other provinces, we have seen that the general public has an obvious desire to return. And also, so far, we have not seen any real negatives regarding reopening to the public. However, to ensure safe public openings, please have throughout your organization posters promoting COVID-19 awareness strategies, like physical distancing, washing hands frequently, encouraging the use of masks, using hand sanitizer stations, which are encouraged to be placed anywhere a visitor may have to touch anything, like elevators, stairwells, and throughout your museum. Please be open about the changes that you have made to opening hours, programming, visitation, etc. Make sure that you circulate any changes to your staff, volunteers, and across your social media, websites, physically at visitor entrances, and anywhere else you advertise. Remind your audience frequently of these changes. Remind everyone frequently. And make sure all your staff are aware of these changes. Simply saying something once might not be enough. And on the topic of web pages, merely making a single statement on your homepage may not be good enough. The message should be consistent across all pages of your website. Wherever these changes have impact, like opening hours, admission standards, programming, and so on, make sure that the changes are visible. So, for example, if you annually ran day camps but are not able to do them this year, make sure that their cancellation is visibly posted on your programming page. If how people are contacting you has changed, because you're no longer able to monitor emails or answer phones, because you're working off-site, make sure that it is also the changes are noticeable on your web page or wherever you are posting for people to reach you. Throughout the pandemic, make sure all staff members understand that they will be expected to participate in regular cleaning. This includes cleaning personal as well as public spaces. Cleaning should be carried out regularly on site throughout the day, regardless of the presence of visitors. As you open to the public, watch how they engage with your museum with these new restrictions. It may also help you to identify things that you may not have considered or included in your list of surfaces that are regularly touched and therefore need to be cleaned. The final step proposed for reopening is continuous monitoring. None of us have ever been in this situation before, so this will be a considerable learning curve. You will need to adapt to your situations and learn from your mistakes. Once you are open to the public, you will be able to see what works for you and what doesn't in terms of the precautions that you have taken. Continuously adapt what has worked for you. Be aware of what is happening in your community with regards to the virus. If you happen to have an outbreak in your immediate community, think about how your organization will respond. I would also recommend that you try to track the whereabouts of people that come on site, like where they go physically in the building. This is for both staff, volunteers, and visitors. The considerations when reopening museums document includes a table called Daily Monitoring of Human Activities at Museum, which operates as a means of contact tracing for people on site. This is just to make it easier to contact people if someone at your organization comes down with COVID-19, to notify anyone that may have been in contact with them. It is also very important to remain in communication with all of your staff and volunteers. Check in with them. Remind them that if they are not feeling well, please do not come in. Or if they think they may have been in contact with anyone who has COVID-19. Or if someone they are living with has been sick. It's better safe than sorry. Simply because you are now open again does not mean that everything is back to normal. I would encourage anyone that can to continue to work remotely. The less people you have on site, the safer it will be. I just want to reiterate that you do not have to open on Monday, June 29th, and you certainly do not need to be open at full capacity. You can wait until you feel comfortable with reopening to the public. If that means you miss your season, just remember, you have all done a wonderful job developing digital content. From increasing your presence on social media to virtual tours and live stream curatorial talks. I do not think, even if you are reopening, that you should stop developing digital content. The pandemic has certainly impacted how museums present programming and interact with their audience. A bizarre positive to this whole situation is that your audience base has grown. You can now reach farther than you ever could before. And that is a wonderful thing. Going forward, being able to produce virtual tours and live Q&A sessions will be invaluable during the coming school season, especially when we cannot really say when things will go back to quote-unquote normal. At this point, I would like to open this up for questions, and I would love to hear from you all about what you have been doing to get ready for reopening. Have you had any luck finding PPE and cleaning supplies? And if you have, where have you been looking? And if you have any questions, by all means, please reach out to me at advisor@saskmuseums.org.